You ever walk away from a conversation and think, why did I just say that? Not because it was a lie, not because it was wrong, but because it was too real. There are things about you that feel harmless to share, and in the moment, it feels like connection. It feels like honesty. It feels like being open. But later, you feel exposed, because not everyone listens to understand. Some people listen to remember. Some listen to compare. Some listen to quietly place you in a box. Carl Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." And here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't just hear what you say. They interpret it through their own fears, insecurities, and motives. The more you reveal, the more control you lose over how you're seen. Your words become stories. Your stories become labels. And those labels start shaping how others treat you. This isn't about being secretive. It's about being selective. Because some things are powerful precisely because they stay private. Some parts of your life don't need witnesses. They need protection. So before you overshare again, before you explain yourself, before you hand someone access to your inner world, there are 5 things you should never tell anyone. And once you hear them, you'll start choosing your words very differently. Let's begin. We all say we want support. We say we want to feel seen. But there's a quiet difference between being supported and being observed. Because the moment you announce your next move, it stops being just yours. And that's where things start to change. The first thing you should never reveal is your next move. There's something electric about a new plan, a shift you haven't made yet, a direction you haven't told anyone about. At first, it lives quietly in your mind. It feels fragile, but powerful, like a seed you're still protecting from the weather. Then you say it out loud. Maybe it's over coffee. Maybe it's in a casual conversation. You mention the career change, the new project, the decision to walk away from something that no longer fits. People smile. They say, "That's exciting." They ask a few questions, but something subtle happens. The energy changes. Now your idea belongs to the room. It gets measured, compared, judged against other people's limits. Carl Jung once said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another." Your vision isn't designed for everyone's feet, and yet, once it's spoken, it becomes exposed to opinions that were never meant to guide it. Think about the last time you shared a goal too early. You felt motivated in the moment. But later, the doubts crept in. Not because the plan was wrong, but because someone else couldn't see it the way you did. Maybe they told you to be realistic. Maybe they questioned the timing. Maybe they reminded you of everything that could go wrong. And suddenly, your excitement turned into hesitation. Jung warned that people often react to growth with unconscious resistance. The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers. When someone hasn't made the move you're about to make, your courage can feel like a mirror they didn't ask for. So they respond with caution, with doubt, with concern. Not to hurt you, but to protect themselves from what your growth reminds them of. Here's the truth most people learn the hard way. Momentum is fragile. When your next move is still forming, it needs silence more than applause, because silence keeps it clean, undisturbed, unshaped by other people's expectations. Think about how different it feels when you do the work first and talk about it later. No explanations, no debates, no energy leaks, just action. When the move is already made, opinions lose their power. Jung believed that what isn't fully formed is easily influenced. The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct. Your next move isn't a performance, it's a process. And processes don't need spectators. Some plans grow best in private, not because they're secret, but because they're still becoming. And the less you announce, the more focused you become. Because when nobody's watching, you move for yourself, not for approval. Next, there's something more dangerous than announcing your next move. It's announcing your doubts. Plans can be questioned, ideas can be debated. But insecurities? They change how people see you. Once someone knows where you feel unsure, they don't just hear your words anymore. They read between them. And that's why the second thing you should never tell anyone is your deepest insecurities. Everyone has that quiet voice inside them, the one that says, "You're not enough. You're behind. They're better than you." Most people don't talk about it, not because they're dishonest, but because they're careful. Your insecurities aren't just thoughts, they're soft spots, and once you reveal them, they stop being private. Think about a moment when you opened up. Maybe you admitted you feel overlooked at work, or that you doubt your own abilities, or that you're afraid people don't take you seriously. At first, the other person listened. They nodded. They seemed supportive. But later, something changed. They started speaking to you differently, joking in ways that hit a little too close, offering advice that felt more like reminders of what you'd shared. Not cruel, just aware. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." When someone hears your insecurities, they don't just learn about you. They measure themselves against you. And sometimes that comparison shapes how they treat you. Your doubts become reference points. Your weaknesses become context. Maybe you noticed it in subtle ways. Your opinion gets questioned more. Your confidence gets tested. Your words carry less weight. Not because you changed, but because their perception did. Insecurities are powerful information. They reveal where you hesitate, where you shrink, where you second-guess yourself. And while honesty can build connection, oversharing can quietly shift the balance. Jung believed that what we expose without integration can be used against us, even unconsciously. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When your insecurities live only inside you, you control how you respond to them. When they live in someone else's mind, you lose that control. Think about the difference between working through a doubt and broadcasting it. One strengthens you. The other invites interpretation. Your growth doesn't require an audience. Your healing doesn't need witnesses. Some struggles are meant to be faced quietly, not shared casually, because the less people know about your weak spots, the less power they have to define you by them, and the more space you give yourself to grow without being labeled. Now, if insecurities change how people see you, your private struggles change how they treat you, because once people know what you're fighting quietly, they stop seeing your strength and start watching for your weakness. That's why the third thing you should never tell anyone is your private struggles. Everyone carries something heavy, a pressure that doesn't show on the surface, a situation that drains your energy, a chapter of life you're still trying to survive. And sometimes you want to talk about it, not for attention, but for relief. So you mention it casually. You say you've been overwhelmed, that things feel harder than usual, that you're just trying to hold it together. At first, the response feels supportive. People listen. They nod. They say they understand. But slowly, the way they treat you begins to shift. They start lowering their expectations of you. They speak to you more carefully. They assume you're fragile. Not because you are, but because now they think you are. Carl Jung once said, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong." People don't always interpret your honesty correctly. They filter it through their own experiences, their own limits, their own fears. Think about a time when you shared a personal struggle at work. Maybe you admitted you were dealing with a lot outside the office. Maybe you explained why your focus wasn't perfect lately. You meant it as context. They heard it as capability. After that, your responsibilities quietly changed. Your input mattered a little less. Your resilience was no longer assumed, not because your performance dropped, but because their perception did. Private struggles are complex. They don't define you. They pass. They evolve. But once they're spoken out loud, they become part of how others categorize you. Jung believed people project their own unresolved issues onto others. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When someone hears about your struggles, they often imagine how they would handle them. And if they think they'd struggle too, they start seeing you through that lens. Suddenly, your strength feels invisible. You're no longer just capable, you're going through something. And while support can be valuable, constant exposure can quietly limit how others trust you. There's also another layer people don't talk about. Some listeners don't offer support. They offer curiosity. They want details. They want updates. They want to know how it's going. Not to help you move forward, but to stay connected to the story. Your struggle becomes something they follow, not something you overcome. And that keeps you emotionally tied to it. Jung warned about identifying too strongly with hardship. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Your struggles are chapters, not your identity. When you keep them private, you give yourself space to grow beyond them without being constantly reminded of who you were in the middle of them. You get to move forward quietly, without labels, without expectations. Some battles are meant to be fought in silence, not because they're shameful, but because they're temporary. And the less people know about what you're carrying, the more they judge you by what you do, not by what you're dealing with. If your private struggles change how people treat you, your weak points in relationships change how people position themselves around you. Because once someone knows where your boundaries bend, they don't just observe your connections, they start navigating them. That's why the fourth thing you should never tell anyone is your weak points in relationships. Every relationship has pressure points, moments where you hesitate, where you give more than you should, where you stay quiet instead of speaking up. But when you reveal those moments to the wrong person, you don't just share a story, you reveal a pattern. Maybe you once mentioned that you struggle to say no, or that you always try to keep the peace, or that you avoid conflict even when something bothers you. At the time, it felt harmless, just honest conversation. But honesty becomes leverage when it's in the wrong hands. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." People don't just listen to your experiences, they study how you respond to them. Think about a situation where you confided in someone about a difficult interaction. You explained how you felt ignored, how you didn't speak up, how you let things slide to avoid tension. Later, that same person starts pushing your limits. They interrupt you more. They take longer to respond. They assume you'll adapt. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but because they learned where your line is. Your weak points don't stay theoretical once they're spoken. They become reference points for how people treat you, and sometimes they quietly reshape the balance in your connections. Jung believed that people project their own behavior patterns onto others. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. When someone hears about your relational struggles, they don't just empathize, they imagine how they'd act in your position. And if they believe they'd push harder, they often do. Think about how differently people treat you when they assume you're firm versus flexible, when they think you'll walk away versus stay silent. Your boundaries speak even when you don't. But when you describe them out loud, you give others a map of what you tolerate, what you excuse, what you overlook, and maps get used, not always unfairly, not always consciously, but consistently. There's also another layer to this. When you talk about your weak points, you start reinforcing them. You turn patterns into identities. I'm just someone who avoids conflict. I'm bad at setting boundaries. I always give too much. Jung warned about identifying with limitations. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. The more you describe yourself through your struggles, the more permanent they feel. But weak points aren't fixed traits. They're temporary habits. And habits change faster when they're worked on quietly instead of discussed endlessly. Some growth happens best without an audience. Because when no one is watching your progress, you're free to redefine yourself without being held to old versions of you. Your relationships don't need commentary. They need clarity. And your boundaries don't need explanations. They need consistency. The less people know about where you bend, the more they respect where you stand. If your weak points in relationships show people where you bend, your personal history shows them how they define you. Because once someone knows your past, they don't just see who you are. They start filtering you through who you used to be. That's why the fifth thing you should never tell anyone is your full personal history. Your past is layered. It's full of moments that shaped you, mistakes that taught you, and chapters that no longer reflect who you are. But once you tell your full story, you lose control over how it's interpreted. Maybe you shared a rough period from years ago, a time when you felt lost, when your direction wasn't clear, when your choices didn't look like progress. You didn't share it to be defined by it. You shared it to explain yourself. But explanation invites interpretation. Now, when you walk into a room, people don't just see who you are today. They remember who you were back then. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When others hold your past in their minds, it quietly shapes how they expect you to act. Your confidence feels surprising. Your growth feels temporary. Your success feels unexpected. Not because you haven't changed, but because they haven't updated their image of you. Think about a time when you told someone too much. You shared where you came from, what you struggled with, and what didn't work out. Later, when you spoke with confidence, it felt like they didn't fully believe you. When you made a strong decision, they questioned it more than they should have. Your past became context for your present. But the past is not a contract. Jung warned about people becoming trapped in old identities. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. When you keep your history private, you give yourself room to evolve without being compared to old versions of yourself. You don't have to prove that you've changed. You don't have to explain growth. You simply live it. There's also another subtle cost to oversharing your story. People begin to feel familiar with you before they truly know you. They think they understand you because they've heard the highlights and low points. But understanding isn't the same as respecting. When someone knows too much about your past, they may feel entitled to comment on your present. They remind you of who you were. They reference old patterns. They bring up moments you've already outgrown. Not to hurt you, but because they still see you there. Your story becomes something they revisit even when you've moved on. Growth works best when it's allowed to be quiet, when your past isn't constantly brought into the room, when your progress speaks for itself, when your present isn't weighed down by old chapters. Your history is yours, not for entertainment, not for evaluation, not for public memory. It's a foundation, not a label. And the less people know about where you started, the more they judge you by where you stand now. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things are stronger when they're simply lived. So far, we've talked about what to keep to yourself. Your plans, your insecurities, your struggles, your weak points, your past. Not because honesty is bad, but because timing, context, and audience matter. Silence isn't about hiding. It's about choosing what actually serves you. Because some things don't weaken your image, they strengthen it. And that brings us to the final piece. What is worth sharing? Silence doesn't mean isolation. It means intention. Not everything should stay hidden, just the things that shape how others define you. So what should you share? Share your values, not your vulnerabilities. What you stand for speaks louder than what you struggle with. Share your direction, not your doubts. Where you're going matters more than what you fear. Share your growth, not your wounds. Let people see your progress, not your pain. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Some conversations should build clarity, not expose fragility. Think about the difference between saying, "I've been working on becoming more confident," versus, "I've always doubted myself." One shows evolution. The other invites limitation. Think about the difference between saying, "I've learned to set stronger boundaries," versus, "I struggle to say no to people." One signals strength, the other reveals a weak point. What you share should reflect who you are becoming, not what you're still carrying. Connection doesn't require full access. Respect doesn't require full disclosure. You don't need to explain every chapter for someone to understand the story. Some things are meant to be felt through your presence, not narrated through your past. And when you choose your words carefully, you don't just protect your privacy. You shape your image, not through secrecy, but through self-awareness. The truth is, what you choose to share defines how the world sees you. Not everything needs an audience. Not every thought, every doubt, every chapter of your past deserves a spotlight. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And every word you share is a choice. So before you speak next time, ask yourself, does this empower me? Does this reflect who I am becoming? Because the world doesn't need your full history. It needs the version of you that moves forward. If this gave you a new perspective, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below. Which of these 5 things do you think you've overshared in the past? And don't forget to subscribe for more insights into mastering your mind, your growth, and your presence.